Hey, everybody, we got a great one today, for a change. And this time, I really mean it because my guest is Michael Lewis, author of so many bestsellers like Moneyball and The Big Short. This time, we discuss his latest bestseller, Who is Government, which is a great antidote to Elon Musk's DOGE and its hostility toward government and government workers. Did I mention the insanely stupid thing they've done, like fire the guys in the Department of Energy who secure our arsenal of nuclear weapons? Yep, that happened. You'll hear Michael tell wonderful stories about people who have worked for the government and did it brilliantly and for all the right reasons. Now, speaking of DOGE, now that Elon Musk is moving on, Trump picked Russell Vought to take over DOGE. Vought is currently the head of OMB, the Office of Management and Budget, so he'll be in both jobs now. You might recognize Vought as one of the primary authors of Project 2025, the document that Trump claims he never read, yet his administration is executing to a T. Clearly, Trump doesn't have a lot of people he trusts. Otherwise, why would he keep piling extra jobs on Vought and Marco Rubio, who is now Secretary of State and National Security Advisor, as well as acting archivist at the National Archives and Records Administration? I wonder when he has time to archive. Oh, and Rubio is also acting head of USAID, but that's not much of a lift since Musk gutted the agency, the richest man in the world, killing the poorest people in the world. Speaking of rich, have you bought any Trump coin? The Trump family's net worth has increased by the billions from all their crypto schemes. If you're one of the smart ones who bought hundreds of thousands of dollars of Trump coin, you may qualify for next week's dinner with Trump at his DC area golf club. And if you really went to town, a tour of the White House. And how about that $400 million Boeing 747 Cutter wants to generously gift to Trump? No strings attached. It would need to be taken apart bolt by bolt to sweep for bugging devices, not to mention the wide array of advanced technology for communication and defensive capabilities that they'd need to add. That would only cost another $1 billion and take, years. Of course, both houses of Congress would need to approve it, which isn't going to happen. My bet is Trump never mentions it again. But how proud are we that our president can build such strong relationships with foreign leaders? I mean, he seems to really love Saudi ruler Mohammed bin Salman, who ordered the murder of Washington Post columnist Jamal Khashoggi. Oh no, I'm sounding judgmental. I'm sorry. And of course, Qatar finances Hamas. Wow, I'm sorry. We better go right to my discussion with Michael Lewis, because it's a great one today, for a change. I think the first time we ever talked was about the fifth risk. Mm-hmm. In the book, you looked at the Commerce Department. Mm-hmm. And I remember, like, the biggest part of the Commerce Department, which I don't think anybody knows unless they read your book, is NOAA.
Yeah. It's 3/4 of the Commerce Department.
It's 3/4.
And the biggest part of that is the Weather Service.
And it's the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration.
Yes.
I remember that. So the biggest part is the Weather Service. Trump wanted to put as the head of NOAA the CEO of AccuWeather.
Correct.
Okay, now the AccuWeather is a company that commercializes the weather that NOAA comes up with, right?
Yes. NOAA gives them all the data and the weather predictions, and they do whatever they want on top of that. But yes.
And they didn't end up with him, thank goodness.
No, his nomination was frozen. The Senate stopped it.
Really?
Yeah. I mean, so he never, I think they held it. I'm trying to remember exactly who did it, but yes, he never got a hold of it. And the worry was that you put a private enterprise in charge of the National Weather Service, a private enterprise that does weather stuff. All they're going to want to do is monetize it. And
exactly
the way you do this is like, Al gets Al, who's got a premium membership, he gets a tornado warning, but Michael, who doesn't have the premium membership, doesn't get it. So that's kind of like, and in addition, it's like it was a public good. Like the taxpayer paid for this whole apparatus in the first place. Why should they get to like monetize it that way?
So this ethos has kind of slipped into DOGE, I think,
Mhm.
which is about getting rid of people, seems.
Your judgment here would be as good as mine as what it's all about. What it is clearly not about is what they say it's about. So they say it was about waste, fraud, abuse, and everything they've done suggests it's the opposite. Like the fraud part or the waste part. There were these people inside each of the agencies, like the Commerce Department, called Inspector General, and this person's job was could call you a senator or you a congressman and say he was an independent watchdog who was charged with ferreting out waste and fraud. And so they got rid of the independent watchdogs about the first thing they did. If they were really serious about that, they would not have done that. And then the patterns to their behavior it's hard to figure out exactly what they're after, because I think they're after more than one thing. I think there's more than one cook in
Right.
this kitchen. It's not just Elon Musk. It's the Heritage Foundation. It's got who got their plan. It's anything that gets in the way of Donald Trump using the federal government.
Well, this is all the Project 2025 stuff.
Right. But it's a bunch of different things going on. But it isn't about like making the government more effective or work better for the people or eliminating waste. I mean, it's funny. Or the big thing they've said is, it's to eliminate the budget deficit. And you could tell by how they just started that wasn't what that was about, because the budget, as you know, like 86% of it is military entitlements and interest on the debt. 14% is this so-called deep state or administrative state or the civil servants. And of that, it's a fraction of that is payroll. And they focused entirely on that. And so no matter what they did there, they weren't going to have that much effect on the budget deficit. It's clearly more about preventing the government from doing what it's meant to be doing and using it to do something else.
And your new book is Who is Government?
Mm-hmm.
It's about the people who populate the government and
Mm-hmm.
a number of heroes.
It didn't set out to be that. It was so what happened was when I wrote The Fifth Risk, which you and I have talked about, I was so struck by the caliber of the person inside the federal agencies. And the couple of times I looked more deeply into who these people were, they were natural subjects for some piece of writing. And there was a reason for this. They tend to be very mission driven. They tended not to want to attract attention to themselves, which makes them better characters. The opposite. They're there in spite of being able to make more money outside in the private sector. They're there for a purpose, and nobody knows what they do. So I thought, like, if I ever come back to this material, I want to focus on those characters. And then I thought, if it's just me doing it, whatever comes out of it will naturally be responded to as, oh, that's just Michael writing what Michael writes. And I thought this material was so here's what almost never happens in writing life. It never happens that you find something that's really surprising to the reader. That's also kind of typical. That actually is, and that it's surprising to the reader that these federal workers are amazing characters doing amazing things, but it's really typical in the government that they are, and their stories just haven't been told. And I thought, to avoid the charge that I was just like Michael was cherry picking a few people, I found 6 writers who are very different kinds of writers. And I just said, here, we're dropping you into the federal bureaucracy. Write about whatever you want to write about. And they don't have to be heroes. They can be whatever you want. If you want to find waste, fraud, and abuse, you can find waste, fraud, and abuse. All but one of the writers, there was one exception, came out with basically the story that I saw was these people are amazing and what they're doing is amazing. The one exception wrote about the consumer price index, which in itself is an amazing accomplishment, but he picked as a character the consumer price index. So there was no like rules about what they could write about, but all these very different writers came out with the same conclusion that, oh my God, look at this. What we have there is precious.
I want to talk about how you found these people. I'm going to and go over the two that you write about.
Hmm.
Can you tell me about, in terms of how you found these people, who Arthur A. Allen is?
Yes, Arthur A. Allen was the first name on an alphabetized list of thousands of civil servants who had been furloughed as unnecessary during the first Trump term when he closed down the government. And Arthur A. Allen turned out to be, so I grabbed him because he was the first name on the list. And I called him up, and he was the only oceanographer in the Coast Guard Search and Rescue Division. And I went and spent a few days with him in Connecticut, where he lives, and found that he'd done a whole bunch of things in his 30-something year career in the Coast Guard. But the coolest thing he'd done was he'd basically invented a science, and the science was the science of how objects drift at sea. Americans have like an incredible ability to get lost at sea. We do it better than everybody else in the
Really?
world combined. Oh my God. It's like, it's because we're rich and we have all these boats, and people think that they're safe and they're not safe. But the Coast Guard rescues like huge numbers of people every year. But it had a problem when Art Allen arrived at the Coast Guard. If they knew that your boat had capsized at 2 p.m. on the Chesapeake Bay because a storm had come up, and they didn't start looking for you till 4, you would have drifted from where you capsized.
Right.
And if they could presume you were on an upside down sailboat, you would drift in a different way than if you were just in the water, a body that drifts. Different objects drift differently, and so differently
So
that
to
if
find you, they had to
have to
do
know,
both.
you had to know how you or the object you were on drifted, and no one had made these calculations. And Arthur A. Allen starts throwing stuff into the Long Island Sound and measuring how it drifts, depending on what it is, and classifies a couple of hundred different kinds of objects. And I know it's a crazy thing to just like do, but like no one else is going to do it. And a huge number of lives end up being at stake. But the wild thing was that when he finally finishes his list of mathematical equations of how various objects drift, like weeks after that Coast Guard has this in their arsenal, how to look for people, a 350-pound man goes off the side of a Carnival cruise ship 80 miles east of Miami and isn't discovered missing for like a
Off a
couple hours.
Carnival cruise ship.
Yeah, just like off the side of the ship. He's like cannonballs off the ship in the middle of the night. And the cruise ship can go look at his cameras and say, oh, we see the object going off 3 hours ago, but he will have drifted. And in any other time in human history, any other time, he's just dead. Like finding him is impossible.
But because of Arthur A. Anderson,
Arthur A. Allen, the Coast Guard plucks him out of the sea alive. This happened. Thousands of lives have been saved because of Arthur A. Allen. But here's the thing that triggered this particular book. That was the last piece of the fifth risk I wrote, was the story of Arthur A. Allen. After I'd spent 3 days with Arthur A. Allen in his home, interviewing his wife, his kids, learning all about the science of drifting objects, I'm going back to the airport, and he calls my cell and he says, hey, you're a writer. And I said, yeah, I'm a writer. He says, man, like my son just told me that you like some of your books have been movies, and you write books. And he said, are you going to write about this? And I'd had a notepad out the whole time. I'm sure I told him, like when I came, I was interested in writing, but he had just, and I said, like, yeah, like, why did you think I flew across country and spent 3 days talking to you? And he said, I just thought you were really interested in how objects drift. And I thought, this is the public servant. He was willing to spend 3 days teaching me, a total stranger, what he knew because he thought it was so important, without having the faintest idea that he was going to get attention, was worthy of attention, all that. And I thought, these people, they're so bad at telling their own story. They just don't dramatize themselves, that this is an opportunity for people who can dramatize other people, that they need to be dramatized because our country has forgotten what these people do.
Well, it's interesting how you come up with each of them. The first one that you write about is Christopher Mark.
Christopher Mark.
He is a guy who ends up figuring out how to prevent the roofs of mines.
Coal mines.
Yeah.
Yeah.
from collapsing, especially what long wall mines, is that what they were called?
All mines, but
All
long wall mi
mines.
there are 2 basic kinds of coal mines, long wall mines and room and pillar mines, and no one but you or me needs to know what the difference is. But he walked into a situation, Christopher Mark. It sounds like, "Oh, trivial problem, small problem, who cares about the ceilings of coal mines?"
No, but no.
But no, it's killed 50,000 American workers over the last century. It during the Vietnam War, it was more dangerous being a coal miner than being in the Vietnam War. It's an incredible because of this, because it's the most common way they die. And he works this out. So he starts his life is in working in a coal mine and is almost killed. And he backs his way out of it.
And you're attracted to his story because at first because you say, "This is a coal miner who came up with."
Yeah. So I saw again, I got another list of thousands of names, and I was looking for some hint of human drama. And it said he'd solved this problem, and it said a former coal miner. And I thought, I imagined a story. Like he grew up in West Virginia, like someone died who he loved, whatever. There was some reason a former coal miner went and solved this systematic problem. And I got him on the phone, and within like 15 minutes, he's told me the following. First thing he says, I said, like, tell me your story. He said, I grew up in Princeton, New Jersey, and my dad was a professor at the university. And I thought, oh no, I don't know where this is going, but it's not nearly as interesting. It's not nearly as interesting as I imagined. And it turned out to be way more interesting because
Right.
his dad was a guy named Robert Mark. You can Google him. He was very famous for an engineer. Robert Mark had invented a technology that enabled him to stress test things like Air Force fighter planes before they built them.
And he built models of them
They
or something?
built models of them and then subjected them to this stress
Stress.
process, and he applied this technique to Gothic cathedrals in France. And no one really knew how the Gothic cathedrals were built because there was left no record, and they're built over like a long period of time. He showed what was actually keeping the roofs of Gothic cathedrals up, and he was so good at it that before he went over to France to visit the cathedrals, he'd say, "The stone's going to be eroded here. There's going to be weakness in the structure here," and it was all true. He really diagnosed the buildings. The son, Christopher, my subject, had rebelled against the father in high school. He said, "I'm not going to join." He started throwing around words like bourgeois in the family house. And he said,
Mhm.
I'm going to join. I'm not going to Princeton. I'm not going to Harvard, which he could have done. He said, I'm going to join the working class. And he goes out and he works in a auto factory and works in a UPS warehouse. And then it finally ends up in a coal mine with several other young radicals. And the other young radicals lasted, he said, exactly a day. The coal mine was so awful, but he liked it. And
Why did he like it?
he thought the way he put it was, you're in a place other people are going to be afraid of and can't tolerate and all the rest, and you're not afraid and you can tolerate it, and it makes you feel special, kind of thing. Like I can hang here. He was just interested in it, but pretty soon he sees like this is a treacherous environment. He gets himself out. He goes and gets a PhD, a undergraduate and a PhD at Penn State, and has a 30-year career solving this problem. And the solving of the problem is really interesting, but the father-son thing is also really interesting. Because I'm on the phone with him, he's telling me the story, and I say, like, oh, you just reprise your dad's career. He figured out why Gothic cathedral roofs don't collapse, and you figured out how to stop coal mine roofs from collapsing.
Of
And
course,
on
of
the
course.
and he goes, no, he goes, not of course. He goes, that's outrageous. It's completely not true. I had nothing to do. What I did had nothing to do with what my father did.
Uh-huh.
He was so defensive about it. I thought there's a drama here, right? And it turns out it just was a beautiful story. It turned out that indeed that he had basically reprised his father's career and not really thought about it that way. But in like the year, I think it was like 2001, the federal government figures out that the National Cathedral in Washington might be falling down. Like that one of the towers is subsiding, and there's a real fear that this thing is structurally unsound. And someone from the government calls Chris Mark's dad, because he's the Gothic Cathedral guy, come
Mhm.
over and figure out what's wrong with this building. And he gets over there and he realizes that whatever's wrong with it is not above ground. That they designed the foundation before they really designed the building, and the building was built over 100 years, and the building's too big for the foundation. He needed to understand what was going on underground, so he calls his son and he says, I need your help." and together they figure out what's going on and which, prevent the National Cathedral from falling down, kind of thing. But again, I found this with these people. Once you're in a purpose-driven life, once you're in a mission-driven life, it's amazing how story follows. It's different from, if you've got a character who's just interested in money, it's just not very interesting. But interest follows people who
You've
have.
written about them.
Yeah, I've written about them, but they aren't story machines in the way people are who got a purpose, who've got something they really want to do. And it isn't about themselves. That combination just seems to lead to really cool stories.
So even after working with his father to make sure that National Cathedral didn't fall down,
Hmm.
he wasn't saying to himself, I kind of did the same work.
No, in fact, I went for a hike a couple of months ago with him and his wife, and he got ahead on the trail for a bit. This was after I'd written the piece. And his wife says, you got him thinking about his father for the first time. He said, she's a psychiatrist. She's kind of funny about it. She says, finally, someone said it to him. But too, when you get just a little distance from the situation and you see that like he had all this aptitude, kind of the apple didn't fall far from the tree. He used it for a different purpose.
And has saved untold number of lives.
Lots of lives, and not just in this country. I mean, people that die. What he learned about how to design a coal mine has been borrowed by everybody else.
Of course. Okay, let's talk about Heather Stone.
All right.
Okay, and she was in the FDA, or is in the FDA.
As of today, I think so, but it's touch and go there. They're letting people go left and right. So this goes back. I wrote a book about COVID called The Premonition. And while I was working on this, a character in the premonition, a UCSF mad scientist named Joe DeRisi, who I was writing about him for other reasons, but he mentions that in his lab, he has just gone looking for cures for a brain-eating amoeba called Balamuthia. I'd never heard of it. No one had ever heard of it until the 90s. It was discovered in an animal in the San Diego Zoo. But it starts turning up in people.
It eats your brain.
It eats your brain. And up until pretty recently, it would eat your brain. They'd take you into the emergency room and, you couldn't stand up and you were seeing triple and all that. And they knew it was something in your brain, but they didn't know what. And people were dying, not in huge numbers, but when people die, they just said, unidentified encephalitis. Something happened in the brain and we don't know what. But now you can test for it and you can discover this thing. And this mad scientist had watched someone die. It was a horrible death. And then watched someone else, even though it's pretty rare, come in, be brought in. And in between, he had taken this brain-eating amoeba, Balamuthia, into his lab and bombarded it with every known approved drug in Europe and the United States. And he found that, weirdly, a single drug used in Europe for urinary tract infections, it's called nitroxyline, killed the amoeba. And so he said, next time this happens, let's at least try to treat it. And they used this drug. They got FDA approval from Heather Stone at the FDA to treat a person with Balamuthia, and the person survived. So I learned about this way back when I'm working on that book. And I say to Joe DeRisi, I say, well, you solved the problem. No one's going to die of Balamuthia anymore. You've got a cure, or at least maybe a cure.
And he says,
and he
no.
goes, no. He goes, I know about it. And maybe a few doctors at UCSF know about it. But if you're dragged into a hospital in Chicago and you have Balamuthia, the odds are pretty good they don't know about this. And I said, why isn't someone, when you have a kind of discovery like this, why isn't there some bank of discovery where you can go find what people have done in these cases? And he said, it's funny you should say that. There's a single woman named Heather Stone in the FDA who has got a bee in her bonnet about this and is trying to build, she's got an app called Cure ID. And the app is for doctors.
Cure ID.
Cure ID. And Cure ID, doctors anywhere in the world, when they're dealing with a rare disease and they try stuff, they can report what they did. And it's useful to know what didn't work as well as what did work. And of course, this is a problem that the government needs to kind of be on, because the private sector has no interest. Like pharmaceutical companies don't care about really rare disease because there's no money in really rare disease, not enough customers. And you can't do science on it. it's sort of like you can't do a randomized control trial about with people who've got balamuthia in their brain.
Right. There are not two groups
They're
at
not
one
two
time.
groups at one
Yeah.
time, and if you had anything that might work, you can't withhold it. It's so what you got is story. You've got a series of anecdotes. Heather had this. She, who had been the victim of a rare disease, she realized that like we need to have a place where people can report these anecdotes. And it's a story. It's the end of the book, and it's really a story of government failure because the FDA doesn't really get behind her. She's not able to market it. We obviously have problems now with trust in the US government. It never really gets off the ground. But what's the story I tell is it's about a little girl, Elena Smith, in DeQueen, Arkansas, who contracts balamuthia. She's dying. The doctors don't know that there is this treatment. Heather Stone is thanked in the back of a technical paper by Joe DeRisi. It's just a preprint. It's just gone on the web. The mom finds the preprint, calls Heather Stone, and Heather Stone fast tracks the drug to the little girl, and the little girl survives. And it's a story, it's this drama about this little girl. And you kind of say, oh, well, that's great. It all worked. But at the same time, this little girl survived, another little girl the same age in Davis, California died because the doctors never heard of the cure. And it's sort of like the story of Heather Stone is a story of a really smart, dedicated person with a really good idea trying to do something in the government should do. And we've kind of lost the will to do it. That's what the story is. And how tragic that is.
Now, going forward, will people with balamuthia know where to go?
I think because of the book and the
Yeah.
story, yes. I think that now you Google balamuthia and this article will be the first thing that comes up. So yes, but what about the other 6 billion rare diseases that
Right.
right? It's what really needs to happen is we need to empower and fund Heather Stone so that we have this resource. But instead, what's happening is the FDA is being gutted. So I mean, it's all moving in the wrong direction right now.
So, because of the book, no one has financed her project.
No, you know, I will tell you what she has told me. She suspects she still has her job because of the book, though she doesn't know that to be true. But she's sitting in a traumatized environment where it's very hard for her to do her job because so many people who she works with have been let go.
Jesus.
Well, this is our world we're living in right now,
Yeah.
right? It's like it's just indiscriminate gutting of the federal government as if it doesn't do anything, so we can just kind of get rid of it.
And why do you suppose Musk came to this conclusion?
I think if you're a private sector, a certain kind of private sector businessman, that this is how you would cut. You go in and you just do it really fast and you cut a lot. He did this at Twitter, right? You just drop everybody and the people who are really necessary, you can hire back. It didn't work at Twitter. Like it's not like Twitter became a successful business when it became X. And if you would, I mean, the last I had a friend who invested alongside him, so who told me that 3 months ago his stock in X was worth half of what he'd paid for it. So that it's not clear that's actually a smart management philosophy, but it isn't a lot. It's an idea that's alive in the private sector. So I think that's one thing going on. The second is just this, I think that there's a faction in the Republican Party that has said so often the government is all wasteful and we don't need it, that they actually come to believe it without knowing anything about what the government's actually doing.
They've done some horrible mistakes already, DOGE, by laying off the guys uh, who keep track of the nuclear weapons and stuff like that.
I know it's crazy. They've made mistakes that even they acknowledge are mistakes, but they're mistakes like cutting the I don't know, basically shutting down the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau is a really bad idea. Cutting the Department of Education is not a good idea. USAID is a really bad idea.
USAID is unbelievably stupid.
Unbelievably stupid, and we're leaving ourselves exposed. Essentially, so a lot of the risks that the government manages are kind of long-term risks, or put it another way, the government's filled with all these, or the society's filled with all these bombs and fuses attached to the bomb, and the government's job is to prevent the fuse from being lit. And when you remove that function, the fuse gets lit, but it might be a while before the spark gets to the bomb. So you don't experience necessarily the cost of mismanaging or cutting or whatever the federal government right away. It's down the road. One answer to your question, why are they doing what they're doing, is they can. Like, nobody sees it right away. They don't feel it right away, but they will, and we will. And then the question is, when some horrible thing happens, as it will people realize it's because they did this?
On Wednesday, I'm going to be speaking with Atul Gawande, who ran USAID.
Mm-hmm.
And,
he will explain to you, right?
I mean, a couple million people will probably die because of that.
Yeah.
And it's the richest man in the world doing that to the poorest people in the world.
That's right. He himself is immune to most of the consequences of his actions. Yes, that's right. And he's, what I've had trouble like remembering, but it is definitely true. You just assume that someone in that position must know a lot. Like, if you're going to go do that kind of thing, you must have made a great study of this place and really thought it through. But it's pretty clear, like, he knows a lot less than I know about the federal government. And I wouldn't dare do anything like this. It's just it's an amazing arrogance that he thinks that he's got this kind of universal competence because he made some money. It's like, I'm rich, therefore I must be smart. And everybody around me tells me I'm smart, and no one contradicts that.
Well, I'm the richest man in the world, and therefore the smartest man in the world.
And therefore I can do whatever I want here.
Michael, thank you.
Al, it's always a pleasure.
Well, I hope you enjoyed listening. That beautiful music is by Leo Kottke, the great Leo Kottke. I want to thank Peter Ogburn for producing this podcast. We'll talk again next week.